Ripley, partner and head of Gowling WLG's intellectual property group in Vancouver. We partner with Cleantech companies at every stage of the business lifecycle, from research and development to expansion into new markets. From securing IP protection to developing an innovation protection plan, we combine extensive IP experience with industry insight and a global platform to help protect your ideas and accelerate your growth. Visit our website at gowlingwlg.com to learn more.
Hey, welcome back. This is BIV Today, and I'm reporter Tyler Orton here at Business in Vancouver. And today it is part 2 of our ongoing discussion about the role of the clean tech sector here in British Columbia, especially as we see the pandemic unfolding and the economic opportunities that are presenting itself as we consider how climate change really is, affecting the world that we live in. With us today for this discussion, it is Anna Stukas. She is Vice President of Business Development at Carbon Engineering. We also have with us Jeanette Jackson. She is the CEO of the Foresight Cleantech Accelerator Center. And we also have lawyer Roch Ripley. He is a partner at Gowling, and he also specializes in the technology sector as well as intellectual property. I want to thank all three of you guys for joining us for part 2 of this discussion. I'll just jump right into it here, because I think there's kind of a question that a lot of people are rubbing their chins at, and it's whether or not we are scaling at a rate in order to meet a lot of the targets that have been set out either domestically or globally. And perhaps if we're not, what can we do to actually meet a lot of those targets using technology? Anna, maybe I'll throw it over to you first. What's your take on this question that many are asking right now?
Well, I would say from a starting point, there's a hard no. We are absolutely not scaling at the rate that we need to in order to meet our targets. And one of the reasons why I think we aren't scaling at that rate is because it is far too easy to commit to a target in 2050 when, many of us have hopefully retired and it's our children's problem, that it fails to incentivize early action. It is far too easy to push it off to being tomorrow's problem. So I think what we need in part to incentivize that scale up is to have meaningful, tangible targets in the near term that actually force us to take action. And those need to be complemented by the right incentives, combination of carrots and sticks, both policy and regulatory, to drive decarbonization, as well as funding and support for innovation, and in particular, support for commercialization.
Do you get the sense, Jeanette, that maybe governments could be doing more to incentivize those things that Anna just laid out for us a second ago?
Absolutely. I completely agree with Anna that it's a pretty strong no, that we are not doing enough. Incentives definitely play one role. I think policy more broadly does as well. Sometimes governments get a little too into the how, not the what, and they don't sort of put enough strict measures on to really make sure that industry is moving. Unfortunately, I'm not a policy wonk. I come at this from a very entrepreneurial perspective. Thankfully, on the Foresight team, we have folks that love policy. The reality is it comes up way more than I'd like. The two things that I think we need to do is get much harder and more progressive on policy and regulation, but also look at sort of the capital structure to help fund both projects and innovators that are providing and developing solutions that can help us meet those targets. The reality is some of the later stage companies, they still can't find enough funding to scale up, even though they've got customers and MOUs and some great metrics that would kind of usually indicate that it's a pretty good, investment opportunity. Now that's shifted a little bit over the last 6 months because of, I think, COVID, and people are saying, regulation is getting a little bit more progressive. So things are moving in the right direction, but there's also some risk capital issues that we have. The IEA, has clearly outlined that for our energy transition, over 35% of the targets will not be met unless we get some of the early innovators now scaling, 10 to 20 times more faster than they already are. And that, quite frankly, requires some risk capital and a serious investment from a government perspective. And of course, policy frameworks also often excite investors in industry to make moves. So when there's confidence in the regional, in the region that you're investing in, or that you're making an industrial move in to become more competitive, whether it's set up a facility or a shop, whatever it might be, if the policy frameworks are there, money will come to the table as well. So it's not an easy challenge that we're up against, but I think we're seeing a lot of things come together that can move us in the right direction.
Well, Roch, from your perspective, though, when you're dealing with, why is it that they're based in British Columbia? Well, why is this kind of a jurisdiction that's, makes sense for them to, whether it's recruit talent or develop technologies? Why is this a good jurisdiction?
Well, BC is a good jurisdiction, I think, in particular for technology and clean tech for several reasons. One, good universities, good labor force. Relative to the US, our immigration policies, particularly recently, are a little friendlier. In clean tech in particular, we have a history of the sector in the city and the province. Of course, with Ballard, with fuel cells, but not just that. The number of, or the amount of diversity we have in the region. Jeanette could talk about water treatment. I know Foresight has been in the news recently about that. Alternative energy, carbon capture, we could go on for a long time. So I think we've got an industry that has a history, that has a good foundation, but that still needs to do a lot of work scaling up. And then we've got the geographical advantage of being pretty well located, time zone wise, next to and in pretty decent proximity to several markets north of the US and California. As close as you get to China without without being in Asia, and equidistant to Europe too. So we've got a confluence of several factors.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up the financial side of things. Obviously, carbon engineering has quite a few of high-profile investors there, and Jeanette had just brought up, the need to get some of that risk capital in. But maybe going back to those capital raises, though, is there uncertainty right now amongst investors just because of what the pandemic has brought on? But we also have, say, all-time low interest rates that might induce investment. I'm just thinking there's multiple different factors that could be at play to either incentivize capital or else maybe make people a little bit wary of investment. I'm just wondering if either Anna or Jeanette could address kind of the thought process going, investments that are needed right now to make this a very successful clean tech sector in British Columbia.
Anna, do you want to go, or shall I?
I was going to say, we're in a very lucky position that we were able to close our last round before this uncertainty, and we aren't currently trying to raise money in the midst of all of this uncertainty. I can only imagine, having previously been in the middle of trying to raise money when the stock market crashed in 2008, that companies that are faced with trying to drive to close on investments right now are in a very challenging position. Partly because some of the best capital available for incentivizing adoption of clean tech has also been hit very hard by the pandemic. If you look at the energy sector, if you look at the aviation sector, there's sectors that have been hit hard. And so those potential strategic investors are likely going to be wary to deploy capital. So then I think it comes to getting a bit creative about where you're looking at what the appetite is in the venture capital community and where government can play a role. Things like the Strategic Innovation Fund and the BC Strategic Investment Fund that was just announced that we hope we'll see roll out. It's an area where government can really help by stepping up there. And again, to what Jeanette said, it's about the what, not the how. Anytime that governments try and get into the range of being prescriptive and telling industry how something is going to happen, innovation is going to outpace the regulations. It's really important for government to look at setting performance-based targets and then allowing industry and innovation to figure out the best way of getting there. but making sure that they're providing that support that's available along the way.
Yeah.
Jeanette, what is the sense that you get right now, especially as you're dealing with so many of these, companies that are maybe ready to scale or they're ready to take that next form of, growth in terms of investment?
Yeah, we fundamentally believe that if you have a strong team, a strong value proposition, and a smart business model, that you can raise money anytime. And if I put my entrepreneur hat on, I was one of the companies that was able to raise money in 2008 when the crash came. So it is possible. But what we are seeing is some downward pressures on valuations. And obviously, it's easier to vet and do your due diligence on technology companies that you can see and touch. So there's a little bit of a delay. The timing that it takes to close a round is going to be a little bit longer unless you're doing more digital clean tech and things like that. And as Anna, started to dive into there, the opportunity to leverage private capital with the, broad amount of program funding that's available, methane, oil well abatement. There's lots of different initiatives in different streams. Built environment was part of the new $10 billion federal program. So if your story has something exciting that relates to some of the programs out there, then you can probably start to factor in some private capital leverage. And finally, the VCs, if you look at the numbers, are active. So deals are happening. PwC's recent report came out, and I'm only referencing just a recent one because it's top of mind. But the numbers are looking pretty good. Deals are getting done, and we get tons of outreach from different investment groups looking to make investments. I'll close off on this from my perspective as well. While some of the recent announcements on programming are interesting, there are additional tools and it depends on your jurisdiction, right? Federally, things like flow-through tax credits for clean tech companies, perhaps capital gains exemptions on clean tech investments. There's lots of things that different levels of government can do to, get some more private capital flowing.
Well, guys, we'll wrap up the discussion in just a moment here, but I think I'll throw this to all three of you, and if you guys want to think about this for a second, but just in terms of your optimism for the industry, where does it stand right now versus where it stood a year ago versus where it stood, say, 6 or 7 months ago when the pandemic first hit us? Maybe Roch, I'll throw it to you first, just about where you see the clean tech industry going and what your feeling is on it overall.
Well, better than 6 or 7 months ago, but to be frank, I was pretty down 6 or 7 months ago across the board. So, and I would say generally better than a year ago. And I was pretty high on it a year ago, too. I do think that this pandemic, in addition to incentivizing some kind of government stimulus to get us out of this recession, and with lots of governments identifying clean tech as a sector that could use that stimulus, it has brought about in the zeitgeist a bit of a cultural shift in that, wow, this is the kind of effort it takes to address an international problem without borders. Not just climate change, which is a very big one, but a lot of clean tech issues across the board. So I'm hopeful that in addition to the stimulus, which I was doing some research and in response to a big last round of stimulus after the 2008 recession, we saw a lot of increase in clean tech activity, patents and otherwise. I'm hopeful that stimulus will happen again. I'm also hopeful the cultural shift will change the mindset to make people understand that, like Anna said, a 50-year time horizon is not going to cut. It's not going to do the trick. We gotta hunker down and focus on this. And if we're having daily briefings to deal with an international crisis like COVID, maybe we don't need that for clean tech, but we need something more than an international conference once a decade.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I think, the really interesting thing for me is that one of the few sectors that have really shown a lot of tremendous growth in light of the pandemic has been the tech sector. And I am so excited about the fact that so many of these multinational technology companies Stripe, Shopify, Microsoft, now Amazon and Google getting onto it, are making big, substantial commitments toward not only carbon neutrality, but also getting to carbon negative, and they're putting their money where their mouth is. And that to me is tremendously exciting, that there is an entire sector that is saying, we recognize there's an urgent need here. We recognize that costs are higher right now. We have the tools available to help to catalyze solutions to climate change and help to drive early adoption that will bring costs down and make these accessible and deployable on a global scale. And that to me is hugely, hugely exciting. If we couple that with the promises from governments to build back better and invest in green economy, not just because it's the right thing to do, because we need to solve climate change, but also because it is good for the economy. It's good for diversification. It will generate revenue and increase GDP. I think that combination is really powerful and very exciting.
Yeah, Jeanette, I'll let you have the final word here with regards to your position on, I guess, the overall sense of optimism about the clean tech sector here in British Columbia.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, for everyone, I know most of and both Anna and Roch, and they know me. So they know that I pretty much have spent my whole life very passionate about the clean tech sector and doing everything we can to make it front and center in most conversations when it comes to economy and social benefits and over and above the economic benefits. So, coming into the pandemic, extremely excited about the momentum building, more companies scaling, more funding going into the sector, policy was getting going. Obviously, come March 15th of this year, complete devastation. We were surveying the companies. They were worried about the number of people they could keep employed. They were worried about revenues, investment opportunities. And I would say that sort of uncertainty stayed for a couple of months. But as we've moved through summer and now coming into fall, I think what we've shown is that the clean tech sector in BC is resilient, and that it is absolutely the best mechanism to increase competitiveness across all sectors as we come out of the pandemic. So making sure that those incentives for industry to go through these transitions, now's the time. And we have the innovation and the capacity to do that now and be a global leader. And of course, from an export perspective, we're seeing other economic recovery packages are very much climate change focused. And so the opportunity not only to transition our local economies to green, but as well as export to those markets, it's a very, very exciting time. And it's not a secret that BC has had 7 of the 100 top global clean tech companies year over year, and in Canada, 12 of those companies. So we're definitely over delivering, and let's continue to build on that and not let those opportunities and metrics slide. So let's keep doing it.
Well, I love going off on a note like that. And for now, I just want to thank Anna, Jeanette, and Roch for joining all of us here, watching this panel. I think it was just a fascinating discussion that we had today. So thank you so much, guys. Until next time, I'm Tyler Orton, and joining us today, it was Anna Stukas. She's Vice President of Business Development at Carbon Engineering. We also have Foresight Clean Tech Accelerator Center CEO Jeanette Jackson and lawyer Roch Ripley from Gowling. Thank you all for joining us. We'll be back on Thursday.